The recent announcement by Novartis of its $100 million digital health investment working with Qualcomm aroused my interest, not because it was an especially radical step, but because it reinforced several similar strategic moves announced by pharma and medtech companies in the last few months. To someone like me, who looks at the industry through the lens of evolutionary theory, these moves shout convergence and have greater implications than they appear to have on the surface. Allow me to talk about the theory a little before returning to the practical implications. You see, in biological evolution, we often see very different creatures developing similar traits or capabilities. The most obvious ones are wings in bats, insects and birds, or echolocation in whales and in bats. I especially like the idea that we humans are the only animals that share an opposable thumb with opossums and fingerprints with koala bears. The biological explanation of this is very interesting. It's not, as one might at first suspect, that these species are distantly related. Rather, it is that these traits evolved independently as a response to similar evolutionary selection pressures. So, for example, anteaters, armadillos and aardvarks all evolved sticky tongues for getting at ants and termites. Faced with similar challenges, evolution pushes very different animals to have very similar characteristics. So how is this relevant for the life sciences sector? Well, most of us view pharma and medtech as two very different companies, albeit struggling to survive in similar environments. Those of us who've worked in both sectors will understand the differences in both environments and the traits of the companies. Scientific innovation, for example, is usually more incremental in medtech and has shorter timelines. How intellectual property rights and pricing agreements work are different too. Medtech companies would love to have pharma product life cycles, and pharma companies would love to have medtech's clinical trial costs. As a result of these differences, many differences exist between a typical pharma company and a typical medtech company. How sales teams add value, how investment is justified, and how innovation works are just three examples. But these two rather different creatures are facing increasingly similar challenges. In particular, the demand for value in the form of better healthcare bang for bucks is the key issue for both pharma and medtech, and both face low-cost competition from generic or me-too rivals. And that leads me back to the trends we're seeing. Increasingly, things that you would call medtech are happening in pharma, and the two are cooperating. I've just been reading, for example, about some interesting work using biodegradable devices to deliver drugs across the blood-brain barrier. The importance of inhaler devices in differentiating the value propositions of asthma drugs is already well established. And of course, companion diagnostics are a big trend in many markets. Add to this areas like bioelectronics, in which GSK is dabbling, and we see the line between pharma and medtech becoming less clear all the time. In evolutionary theory, predictions always come with a caveat, but it's not hard to see the emergence of companies that can't really be called pharma or medtech, but have the characteristics of both. Equally, it's clear that these hard-to-characterize species will exist because it is the combination of pharma and device technology that will create the bang for bucks that the customer requires. So why is this important? Well, if this happens and we see the evolution of pharmatech companies, will it make a difference in practical terms? Well, yes. If you remain a pure play pharma or medtech company, your drug or your device will need to be very effective to create better value than a combined product. And if you decide to become a pharmatech company, you will need to become very skillful at working out what traits of each to adopt. It's easy to imagine the recipe for disaster. Pharma costs and timescales to create medtech small innovations and high sales force costs. And as always, there's a third option, as we see in the Novartis Qualcomm case, forming a symbiote, which is two distinct companies that support each other and look from the outside as if they are one. In biology, coral reefs and lichens do this, but it's a difficult trick to pull off, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall when pharma execs try to manage with medtech's marketing budgets, for example, or when medtech execs learn to live with pharma's compliance regime, as they are learning to do at the moment. The bottom line? Well, you can expect pharmatech holobions to emerge first and lead eventually to a whole third species that compete strongly with pure play pharma and pure play medtech. And whether you decide to be one of them or whether you decide to compete against them, it won't be easy. Because if you want to feed on ants, it's hard to compete with an antitech.